Hello, gremlins! I still don't have a backdrop, but I figured today I can just sit in front of my project. I just recently acquired this desk, which I'm going to use as a painting desk. It is quite beaten up and covered in the remnants of various stickers, which I need to remove, but I did get it for free on Facebook Marketplace, so I think it's worth it. And today my goal is to first clean up the desk and remove the stickers, and then paint the thing to look like a forest dream, with like mushrooms and moss and ferns and insects all over. I will be leaving a lot of the wood visible, so I'm not like painting everything, but I will be covering the whole thing in designs of nature. And I'm very excited about this. This is the first time in my life where I've owned furniture for myself, which means I can actually customize the furniture. As you can see, I've already gotten started making my office chair look like a mossy tree branch. And now I have this entire desk to do crimes to. I'm very excited. So my first goal is to take photos of the desk and then sketch ideas for what I can paint on it digitally, and then I can transfer those ideas to real life. Welcome to the digital world. Off camera, I finished scraping off the remains of the stickers and scrubbed the desk down to figure out what stains were dirt and what were unremovable and needed to be covered by my designs. I also, off camera, gathered a bunch of reference images for my ideas, so we can get right into roughly sketching onto these photos. My first idea is that the side of the desk will look like it's growing with vines of ivy, and I spent a while drawing each ivy leaf, which I probably could have skipped given all I needed to transfer this idea to the real desk was the lines of the stems. At least it gave me a good vision for what this would look like. In the space between the ivy, I also want to add 3D mushrooms out of some foam clay that I recently acquired for the first time. The front of the desk, including the drawers and shelves, will be covered in mushrooms, ferns, and random critters. They are classic toadstools alongside different varieties of simple brown mushrooms scattered through the whole design. The critters are more unique, most will only appear once. There's an atlas moth, a couple ladybugs, a frog, a snail, and some more critters that will get added to my plants when I actually start painting. There are both ferns and other plants in this design, although ferns much more frequently as I love their look and the process of drawing or painting them. On the sides of the shelf, there are some more mushrooms and ferns of course, but I also added another unique critter on each side, a lunar moth on the left and another ladybug on the right. With all my ideas roughly sketched out, I return to the physical world with my sketches open on my computer and a black pencil in hand, ready to mark out all my designs on the wood. Unfortunately, the camera did not pick up my sketch lines very well, so you can't really see what I'm doing. The sketches are a little more visible when I start working on the front of the desk instead, which is nice. You can actually see the mushrooms and frogs I'm drawing on the drawers. Still, I'm gonna speed through this, as penciling in my designs isn't nearly as interesting to watch as painting them. I decided to paint my desk one design at a time, starting with the mushrooms. I started with the toadstool stems, mixing an off-white paint with a little extra brown in it for the shadows, and I perfected my stem technique as I went, making sure to add a little shading under the skirt and cap so the mushrooms look 3D-ish, or at least not completely flat. Also, anytime I'm working on a drawer, I'm taking it out of its slot on the desk and placing it on the desk's surface on a plastic sheet, so I don't risk dropping paint on the carpet below the desk. I'm doing my best here to make sure I'm positioned so that my work is actually visible, but throughout the whole process I will mess that up sometimes and stand directly between the camera and the desk, or stick my head in the way while I work. I'm so sorry about that. It's hard to film a large piece of furniture being painted with small details, and knowing where I am in space is not my strongest skill. When I painted the fly agaric stems, I added some more brown to my paint and painted some small brown mushroom stems which unfortunately aren't super visible on camera. Occasionally I do miss a single mushroom or a small cluster and just paint it quickly off camera rather than repositioning my tripod. So if any mushrooms suddenly appear, that's why. I'm using a few shades of red for the fly agaric caps to mimic how they look in real life and to add variety between the mushrooms. My darker shade has brown mixed into the red, and the lighter shade is just fully orange. I'm doing my best to blend those different paints out on each cap, using a different ratio for each, and only a few of the caps get orange, again for variety. I also had to be very precise with my edges, because my red paint was just translucent enough that if I went over my black pencil lines, those pencil lines were visible through the paint. When I messed up, I had to layer the paint much more thickly to hide the sketch, and hope that adding white spots would disguise it. Thankfully, they do. I could technically work on a different element of this desk while waiting for one section to dry, but I preferred to finish one object at a time, so instead I waited for the red to dry and then came back with thick white paint to add the iconic spots of these mushroom caps. I'm clustering the spots more thickly at the top of the cap and on the smaller, younger mushrooms, and I think adding these dots really do bring these mushrooms to life. Also, shout out to artist grade titanium white paint, which is so much more expensive than the usual acrylics I buy, but so worth it because it is actually opaque, unlike the much cheaper white paints that require so many layers. I am not sponsored by Titanium White or anything, I just feel like it needs some praise. With the first set of mushrooms done, I returned to the tiny, barely visible mushroom stems I painted earlier, and added some much more visible, darker brown caps. One layer is just solid dark brown, and another layer is slightly lighter brown blended out to add highlights and shadows, and these simple mushrooms were completed pretty quickly. The final mushrooms on this part of the desk are much paler, and I had to trial and error my paint color to avoid accidentally color matching the desk wood. These mushrooms are also larger than the dark brown ones, taller than some of the toadstools, but much less bulky. As well as a few clusters on the desk shelves, there are also a few of these mushrooms on the drawers, so once again I took the drawers out of the desk and placed them on my plastic mat to paint them. These drawers are already filled with art supplies, by the way. I needed the storage space, so I started using it several days before I got around to painting the desk. It's fine, all the stuff in the drawers survived without getting paint on it, as far as I've noticed. It just made moving them around a little more complicated since they were heavy and had things that could spill. Since the caps of these mushrooms are only a little lighter than the stems, I didn't bother waiting for the stems to dry before continuing. It's summer anyway, the paint dries quickly in this weather, so it won't smear. Don't mind my hair in this next section. It's the next day and I decided to dye my hair green, and also work on the desk while the dye processes. We've reached the greenery section of the desk, and now, instead of going species by species over the whole desk, I'm going shelf by shelf. I don't need to perfectly color match my paints for the plants the way I did for the mushrooms, both because there's a little less mixing involved and because variations in the shades is realistic for plants. I'm starting with the ferns on the top shelf, and before I start penciling in the fronds, I did my best to scrub away my pencil marks, since I don't want to perfectly follow my lines when I paint. I've decided that this desk will be growing two different species of fern. The first is a lighter green, gradienting from yellow-green at the top down to a mid-tone at the bottom, and with very detailed and lacy fronds. These ferns take a while to paint each, but the shape of my brush is perfect for the frond feathers, so it's quite a fun and satisfying process. These ferns are purposefully messy and imperfect. They look painted, and that's okay, that's part of the goal. The other type of fern is a lot quicker to paint and darker in color. This time, the top of the fern is the darker shade of the other type, and it gradients down to an even deeper green. These fronds are also much less detailed, just round and following the layout of the pencil sketches I drew, which don't need to be washed off on these ones. The next fern is another more detailed one, and unfortunately I put my head right between the camera and the art of this, so you can get a really good look at the dye in my hair, and less of a good look at the fern behind it. The final fern on the top shelf is another of the simpler, darker ones. I then realized that the dye had been in my hair for double the length the bottle recommended, so I left my ferns to dry while I went to rinse my hair off and see if the dye works. I'm currently trying to find the perfect hair dye brand and color to use as my signature color, and in this particular experiment, while it did make a nice color at first, seems to be washing away quicker than other brands I've tried, so once this bottle is finished, I'll be moving on to something new. Back to the desk with my newly green hair, I took a break from going shelf by shelf to quickly paint all the blades of grass, in a couple different shades of green and across the whole desk, including the drawers, although I didn't bother to change my camera angle to actually show the drawers. And we're back to the detail work on the top shelf, this time to paint our first critter. Partway through the process of this desk, I decided that since I'd already picked some relevant critters, I wanted these critters to represent my close friends, who I've nicknamed the Gremlins on my channel. The Atlas moth I'm painting right now represents the bearded gremlin, who also happened to be on a video call while I work here. Honestly, pretty much any insect could represent the bearded gremlin, but I specifically associate him with Atlas moths, and also really like the look of the Atlas moth myself, so I happily wanted one on my desk. The base of the Atlas moth is a mostly reddish-brown, with lighter brown at the tips of the upper wings. The magic comes in at the details, the black and white markings on the wings that make these moths distinct. I started with the white, adding stripes down the wings and triangles on the inner sections. When the white dried, I added black right next to it, as well as black dots around the very edges of the wings, and dark marks on the tips which make the wings look like snakeheads, for defense. Finally, I added some extra brown texture and detail, and the bearded gremlin's Atlas moth was complete. The top shelf is also nearly complete. All I need to do now is add a ladybug to represent one of my other friends, Garnet the gremlin. I'm actually adding two ladybugs, one at the top shelf and one on a desk drawer, so the camera will switch between the two as I add each layer. First, the black head and legs. Next, the main red body, a little shaded on one side and a highlight on the other. Finally, I added unique black spots to each, and with that, Garnet the gremlin is part of the desk, and the top shelf is done. And I can dramatically remove the blue painter's tape that protected the horizontal shelf surface and reveal the results. The first step in the middle shelf of greenery is more ferns, starting with a very large feathery one. Given the shadows on this shelf, it's a little harder to see my work, but unfortunately when I tried to rig up a lighting setup, I was unsuccessful due to the placement of outlets in the room. It doesn't help that despite my attempt at locking the focus, my camera keeps focusing on my head rather than my art. Something to troubleshoot for next time, I suppose. Next is a new plant, an unspecified shrub or herb with a few large leaves on a branching stem. It isn't designed to be any one specific species, just a generic plant. There'll be a few of these on this desk. In fact, another one is coming up right away, a lighter shade of green this time, with smaller leaves and a single straighter stem. Again, not a specific species, just a plant. Another critter appears, this time not an insect, but a blue-tongued lizard, representing the ravencat gremlin. As the ravencat gremlin is a newer friend, I did not automatically know what critter to represent her with. A raven is too large for this desk. So I asked, and found out that rather than an insect, she would prefer to be this species of lizard that lives in her garden. I was happy to figure out how to paint one. The base of this particular blue-tongued lizard is a pale brownish grey, and the lizard is lounging under one of my plants, with its tail curled along to the horizontal surface of the desk for some visual interest. Its tongue is, of course, blue, and sticking out of its mouth. Blue-tongued lizards have interesting patterns on them, and this one is striped with darker brownish grey, which I dotted on to give it a scaly texture. Finally, I added a dark eye and some stumpy little legs that also cross planes to sit on the horizontal shelf. Another critter on this shelf is the lunar moth, which does not represent anyone in particular. It is just a very cool looking moth and I wanted to draw it. This particular moth also has the purpose of covering the paint pen smiley face that the previous owners of this desk left me, and which would not scrub away. The base of this moth is a pale minty green, and I got so impatient waiting for it to dry that I ended up adding the next layer, pale yellow, while the paint was still wet and suffering the consequences of the paints mixing slightly. Handily, this did allow me to blend the pale yellow into the underwings to make them slightly lighter in shade. I then got to add brownish, fluffy antennae, and at last the purple details on the outside of the wings, including the crescent moon-shaped marks that I assume give this moth its name. And with that, the second shelf is also complete, and I can dramatically peel off its painter's tape and reveal my work. We now come to the bottom shelf, and again, I'm starting with the ferns. This time, the central fern is the simpler, darker species I've been painting, as is another smaller fern in frame on the right side of the shelf. There are a few more generic, species-unspecified plants on this shelf. The first has 2 branching stems lined in almond-shaped leaves. The second has 3 stems and the same pattern of leaves, although the colour is different. These aren't supposed to be the same type of plant. Next up is another critter, this one a snail that also doesn't represent anyone in particular. I added some shiny highlights to its grey body and black dots to its eye stalks. While I waited for that to dry, I went back to my plant and added more detailed leaf veins, definitely differentiating it from the other similarly shaped plants I painted. When I was discussing this painting project with some friends, the Ravencat gremlin suggested I add some Easter eggs to the design. A few will come into play later, a few are the representative critters, but most literal, perhaps, is the small decorated Easter egg I added to this corner as a joke. It's the same color as the lunar moth's wings, with darker green vine patterns painted onto its shell. This one's for you, Ravencat. There isn't much detail in the snail's shell, but enough detail to see it swirl. The final step of the bottom shelf is the left side, where I'm painting another feather-fronded fern. This is not an easy angle to paint a detailed fern in, especially when trying, surprisingly successfully, to not block my work from the camera. And once again, we can peel off the tape and reveal that the shelves are done and dusted. The camera decided to be dramatic about this moment as well, as the tripod loosened itself too much to hold my phone straight, and the whole thing tipped sideways. With the shelves done, I could focus my attention to the drawers. I've done quite a bit of work on them as I've gone. All the mushrooms, the grass blades, and the ladybug were painted alongside the matching shelf components. Now it's time to add some greenery. I have 3 drawers and only 2 can fit on my plastic mat at once, so I'm starting with these 2. I also, for the first time, worked on 2 feathered fronded ferns at the same time to save myself time and paint mixing. Each shade of paint got added to both ferns before I mixed it darker for the gradient effect, and this worked quite well. The other fern on these drawers is another simpler and darker one, and was painted solo. Finally, I mixed up some moss-coloured paint and began dabbing mottled green onto the handles to hide some scratches and make them more interesting. Carefully, so as not to smudge the fresh paint, I returned these drawers to their spots, and grabbed the final drawer to add moss to its handle as well, and while I had this paint out anyway, I added some moss to the edges of the shelves to cover up some old smudges or scratches, and add some more green detail. Given I've represented all the other gremlins in the critters on this desk, I should probably represent myself as well. And here I am, as a frog of course, a bright green frog loafing on the side of my desk with large black eyes. And with that, the front of the desk is complete. The next step, the vines climbing up the side. This would be easier to film in a vertical ratio given the shape of the desk, but that doesn't work for a YouTube video, so just ignore all the empty space around the desk. First, I painted the stems of the vines, which will guide the rest of my process here. Sorry about the weird cropping of the next few shots. As I got started painting the ivy leaves, I forgot to put my mask back on, and I am not comfortable showing my whole face on camera, so I've cropped myself out. These ivy vines will also have a gradient, like my ferns did. The first few leaves of each tendril will be lighter, getting darker the closer to the base of the vines they get. Each leaf needs about 2 coats of paint, although sometimes I skipped filming the second coat as it isn't super visible on camera. This part of the painting process took a long time, but I got it all done in one day somehow. Now that I've opened the gates to the world of customizing furniture, I feel like I could be unstoppable. I have so many ideas, large and small. I have a set of drawers that I want to fully paint at some point, although I'm waiting till it isn't summer, since that will have to be done outside, and this week has been regularly hitting 40 degrees Celsius. I have a lamp I want to make look like a mushroom, and the idea to acquire another lamp to do the same thing. And there's so many more things I could do that I haven't thought of yet. This is so exciting. The process of painting the furniture is also so satisfying. I haven't spent a lot of time painting wood, and even less time specifically muraling it. Usually I'm either painting fabric, which has a very specific texture and process, or I'm painting on paper or canvas for my art course. Wood is quite satisfying to paint. I'm not sure how long-lasting this paint will be, given I didn't sand or prime the wood first, but I'm hoping that as long as I don't try scrubbing or scratching it off, it'll last decently well. And I can always do touch-ups as I go. One of the other Easter eggs I painted on my desk, also at the suggestion of the Ravencat gremlin, is a hole chewed in one of the ivy leaves that looks like the funky S people doodle. I also made another ivy leaf half chewed in no particular pattern. I'll admit, painting these leaves did start to get tedious. It's a lot of 3-pointed leaves, and they needed 2 coats of paint each. It was a lot. But the desk's look gave me just enough dopamine to keep going, and eventually I finally finished the base of the leaves. Just the base? Well, yes, I'm also going to go back and add leaf vein details, after taking a break to lie on the floor for a while, of course. It's kinda hard to see the leaf veins, especially on the lighter leaves. At least it only takes one coat of paint to draw all these, so it shouldn't take as long as the base layers. And once I got lower down to the darker leaves, it's a lot more obvious what I'm doing. I think the end result was worth the tedium. These leaves look amazing in my opinion. On the half-eaten leaves, I even added the detail that the leaf veins weren't eaten and remain as a skeleton in the gaps. Finally, I reached the lower half of the desk, switching camera angles and sitting on the floor to work. The leaf veins are definitely visible by now, and they really make these vines look like ivy. I'd also like to triumphantly report that I did not stain the carpet with paint at any point during this project, despite a couple close calls. Success! I don't want to completely fast forward through the rest of the vine painting process, but also there isn't a lot more to say, so enjoy a segment of music for a minute while I finish, and I'll return when I've moved on to the next step. Step of painting directly onto the desk's surface was adding a small bright green caterpillar crawling on the half-eaten S-leaf. Whee! We're done! We made it through the base painting! Next step, adding a little bit of 3D. This is my first proper time working with foam clay, a material the Ravencat gremlin recommended I try, and oh my goodness, it is so satisfying to mold. I'm making a few clusters of shelf mushrooms, sculpting them directly onto the side of the desk and leaving them there to dry in place. When the basic mushrooms were shaped, I used part of my nail clippers to add the grooves of the gills to the underside. Then, despite the fact that I still had the motivation to work to finish the project, I had to wait for the next day for the mushrooms to dry. Even that wasn't really long enough, having since actually read the instructions and seen that you're supposed to wait 48 hours for the foamed clay to dry before painting it. However, I was impatient and the end was in sight, so the next day I carefully peeled the mushrooms off the desk and started painting them brown, starting with a mid-toned base coat. After a quick second coat to the gills, I began to detail them with dark brown lines in the shadowed areas. I did my best to keep the paint inside the lines only, but was not completely successful, so off camera I ended up carefully finger painting over the worst offenders with my lighter shade, just to leave only the shadows dark. Finally, I used a wide-ish brush and a gradient of paint to paint the top of the shelf mushroom, making it look slightly stripy and varied with a pale edge. When the mushrooms had dried, I reattached them to the desk with PVA glue, and this massive project is complete and ready to reveal. The desk is complete, and I am so happy with it. Obviously at the moment it's a little bit empty. I did clear off all my supplies from painting it to be able to film the reveal footage, but this is not how the desk will look in action, because this is going to be my painting desk. So let's get all the supplies in place and see how it looks all set up and ready to work with. And here it is with all the paints laid out on the shelf. I'm sure it won't stay this organized for long, none of my things ever do, but I do really like how it's laid out, and I did have technically already used the desk like this without all the decorations, so I know that this system of paint storage should work at least for a little while. It does cover up some of the painting, but I always knew that that was going to happen, and some of the more important bits of the painting I've specifically left gaps for to show off, like this blue-tongued lizard. Anyway, I had so much fun with this project, and I'm so excited about this desk, and about the possibilities of customizing more furniture in the future. It was such a fun project. So thank you for coming along with me while I worked on this, and I'll see you all next time. Until then, bye!